in GMT, and apparently I'm not going on at 12:25 my time. I'm going on at 10:25. So you know what? Screw it. We're going to do it live. It's all good. I don't actually have any slides, so I can. Let's see. Yes, I can turn on my webcam. Sure. We'll actually talk to people. It'll be great. Okay. So what is Idili? So this is going to be a kind of an interesting talk because I'm basically just introducing and knocking over a whole bunch of things. I'm basically just introducing everybody to what I've been working on kind of in my spare time for the last couple of years, and decided to use DatConf as basically an excuse to give myself a kick in the pants and actually try to finish off at least sort of a MVP so that I could present it to people and maybe actually get some outside interest in it, or and maybe some contributors. So Idili is a portable personal storage device slash information resource and slash kind of social sharing hub. It's meant to run on a low-powered single-board computer, powered by a battery, and carried with the owner, basically, all the time, just like we carry kind of our phones with ourselves. Sort of my anticipation is that, at least at first, it would probably go in a case that would go in like a backpack, or maybe if it's slim enough, like in a pocket. But that eventually it would probably be worn sort of as an accessory, or turned into kind of jewelry or something like that. And the kind of inspiration behind this was basically getting fed up with my cell phone, this powerful computer that I carry in my pocket that's connected to the internet all the time, but which I can't actually use to store. It's not really meant to store my data in a permanent fashion, and it's certainly not powerful, or not. It's not that it's not powerful enough, but not enabled to connect directly with the people that I want to connect with without using an intermediary. And so that was really frustrating to me because, sort of there's this dream. I think when we were young cyberpunk kids, like there was this dream of like, you're connected to the internet all the time, and that's sort of come true, but it's come true only in a consumer kind of way and not in a producer kind of way. And I think, I'm probably kind of speaking to the converted on that front. So the aim is to do everything, all of those things kind of without the cloud, with the sort of like the parenthetical exception of encrypted backup of data to the cloud, is I think a good idea. Right now, the design is basically a backend written in Rust, mainly for the desire for kind of performance on low-powered, computers, single-board computers, but also obviously the safety that Rust brings is awesome. It has, at least for the moment, a fully documented kind of REST API. So anybody who wants to create a third-party front end to it can do so, and my intention is to maintain that documentation as sort of things are added to it. I have just in the last few weeks started on a front end for Android written in Kotlin that I was hoping to have done today, so at least I could show folks that, but I ran into a snag. Basically, Android won't let you connect to MDNS sort of .local domains, which I only discovered at the last minute, and you have to like jump through some other hoops to make it happen. You can do it, you have to jump through hoops. So I could not manage to finish that in time, sadly. Right now, the backend handles only kind of photos / images, like backing up your photo database or looking at your photo database. But with that more or less done as of now, I'm hoping that adding more kind of features / data types will become a lot easier with that sort of underpinning kind of done with it. As for sort of what what other sort of features or data types I'm kind of aiming at. I think the obvious sort of contacts and calendar are pretty obvious. I think it would be a great place to store location history in a way that is sort of as interesting as Google location is, but obviously with the added privacy of not sending that data elsewhere. And then social media updates, obviously in sort of like either microblogging or full on sort of blogs. And I'll talk about sort of the social media thing in a few minutes. Other than that, the other big sort of feature that I'm thinking hard about is using it as a source of identity in a distributed identity kind of sense, and I will talk about that as well in a few minutes. Some of the interesting and fun challenges that sort of this project is raising, number one, obviously, is going to be battery life and compute power. That's going to be really interesting, and seeing how long the thing can last on how much of a battery, and how I can sort of tune things and tweak things and possibly even throttle things to make that battery life go as far as it can. Another challenge is bootstrapping it onto random Wi-Fi networks as the owner carries it around. This is less of a problem now because we are all trapped at home and on the same Wi-Fi network all of the time. But someday we may move around again, and so having the ability to get it onto whatever Wi-Fi network you have access to while it is headless is fun. So I've been playing around with both trying to use Bluetooth Low Energy to give it credentials, or having it whenever it can't connect to a Wi-Fi network or doesn't see one that it knows about, having it basically create its own AP with a captive portal that you can then use to tell it credentials. So those are both possible options, obviously. And then down the line, kind of thinking about putting a 4G modem in there, or even a 5G modem if that ever comes about, could be also interesting, although those come with their own challenges, including sort of pretty tight restrictions on what data can come into something on a 4G connection. It's very firewalled, so that would be an additional challenge. Along with the sort of moving Wi-Fi networks is this problem of connecting to a device with a floating IP address, from network to network. There's some question, would it be a good security thing to have a restriction that says, like, you have to be on the same network as your Idili in order to communicate with it? That might be actually a good thing, but I can see sort of circumstances where it might not be great. MDNS is definitely a possibility. You can always use that to locate things, but there are sort of questions that arise there, including the possibility of name collisions. If you have two Idili hubs on one Wi-Fi network, you're going to have a problem, as well as not every network being as amenable to MDNS as perhaps they ought to be by the standard. So you do run into situations where that just simply doesn't work. Alternatives to that, I think some sort of overlay network. I've been toying around with Yggdrasil, which I don't know if people are familiar with, but it is a sort of mesh overlay network that's driven over IPv6, kind of like reserved IPv6 space. That does work, and it is promising. Yggdrasil is pretty CPU heavy, though. I've noticed that when I'm running it, it does eat up consistently, even if it's not sort of managing data. It eats up a fair amount of CPU. Another challenge is just hardware. Right now, I'm using Raspberry Pi 0W, which works, but it's pretty old. At this point, the Pi Zero was released in 2015, so that's 5 years ago now. The Pi Zero W was released in 2017, but I don't believe they updated, the CPU or the RAM in it at the time. RAM is a problem. The Pi Zero only has 512 megabytes of RAM, there's not a whole lot to play with when you have to run Postgres for database underneath it. We also don't, I don't need much of the functionality of a Pi Zero. I mean, particularly the HDMI output and the header, all of the header pins, along with probably I think a couple other things at least, are not necessary for what I'm trying to do. And so sort of raises the question of like, is this a project that's going to take me down the road of designing my own hardware someday? Which, that would be fun. And then the last really interesting challenge here is definitely in the UI and UX design arena. I think there's a lot of interesting questions to be conveyed to the user having to do with, whether or not, whether the Idili is accessible, whether it's sharing anything, and how it's, what it's connected to, and so on and so forth, that I think could be really interesting, UX questions that I'm eager to dig into. So those are all like the fascinating things that are coming up in this project, and why everyone I think should check it out and help out with it. But that's just my opinion. Right now, kind of, I don't know if humorously, if you want to say humorously, but Idili doesn't actually use hypercore or DAT for anything at the moment, which is, makes this an odd talk to be giving at the DATConf. But I think that there are a couple of places where I'm excited to start integrating DAT into Idili, because I think it's a good fit. The first one, which I mentioned earlier, is identity, and I'm not familiar if people are. I'm not sure if people are familiar with the decentralized identity standard. So I'll go into it kind of real briefly, and then I think we'll have time to talk about it more if people want to. But decentralized identity, or DID, is actually it's a W3C standard that is basically provides methods for doing CRUD operations. So that's create, read, update, and delete. Doing so CRUD operations on a document, and they go into a lot of detail about what's in the document, but basically a document that describes an entity. So that can be a person, but it can also be an organization or an object, a thing. It can be, a group of people that are sort of informally affiliated, whatever, you can think of. The document itself is a JSON LD document. It contains, public keys, contains, I think, what they refer to as endpoints, which is basically ways of finding the entity that the document is describing, such as an email address or a matrix ID, or an activity pub kind of endpoint, if that's what you want. Or it can be other things, including a DAT address or a secure scuttlebutt address, whatever. And they basically kind of uniquely identify one entity. So in order to be useful, they have to be globally retrievable by anybody, globally readable. They also have to be creatable, updatable, and deletable by just the entity that owns the identity. And there are a variety of different ways of implementing those features, I guess you would say. And those are referred to as DID methods. And there are a bunch of them. There are a lot of them that are blockchain based, as you might imagine. There's Ethereum, Bitcoin, a whole bunch of other blockchains that are sort of very identity specific. There's one called Veries1. There are others as well. But I think actually that DAT slash hypercore kind of is a great solution to a lot of these problems. In a way that doesn't require the massive cost of a blockchain. And so I have actually already written up a method specification for hypercore DID, which I'll throw a link to in the chat kind of at the end here. But I haven't really submitted it for kind of like an official as an official method yet, mainly because I want other eyes on it. And so if folks are kind of curious about how hypercore might fit into an identity solution, I would actually really love to chat with folks and have a look at the spec that I wrote up before sending it off to submit to the folks at the sort of DID group at W3C. So that's one kind of next interesting step that I feel like could involve hypercore. And then the other one is kind of social sharing of stuff, be that whether it's kind of Twitter like short messages or photos or comments on photos and so forth. I don't want to reinvent the wheel here, and I would really rather prefer to piggyback on an existing protocol, partly so that not your other sort of people you want to share with don't have to have an Idili hub themselves. Obviously, I want to be able to do this cross interoperable. The problem, it'd be great to interact with ActivityPub since there's a lot of other folks there to sort of share with, but it's very DNS dependent and it's not delay tolerant, or it's only somewhat delay tolerant. So finding a way to bridge that would be really interesting. But I would also love to use hypercore to do some of the sharing as well in a sort of I know Paul and the Beaker folks did Fritter or whatever, but so I know there are ways to kind of enable a social sharing feature or kind of ability on top of hypercore, but I haven't dug into it a whole ton enough to figure out exactly how that would fit in. And so that's sort of like my other big question right now is sort of how the social sharing aspect of it would really fit in. Something with even lower spec hardware. Yeah, I didn't want to start getting into like embedded, at least not yet. I think that's like could be going in a direction, but I really kind of wanted a Linux base underneath it. And I had a Raspberry Pi lying around. And so that was kind of the route that I went, because I didn't want to start, dabbling with like really low level hardware. I think the other issue is that with this kind of setup, like I think you could do it without a database underneath it, but it's a whole lot easier with a database underneath it. And so having PostgreSQL also underneath it just made sort of some things easier, so that I didn't have to like reinvent that wheel. And so that's kind of some of the reasons why I ended up doing Linux on a Raspberry Pi. Partially just because of availability, and also partially because I wanted to try to focus on this problem rather than trying to write embedded Rust for NESP or something like that. So that's all the sort of like speaking at people that I wanted to do. I would love to sort of have do conversation or question and answer about sort of what I've been up to. I'm also going to paste a link to the Git repo for Idili, so folks can have that to look at, which perhaps I should have done earlier. Sorry, but here we go. So there you go. That is, if that worked. Yeah, there you go. So that's the Idili repo. And actually, I think I have a couple commits that are local that I haven't pushed since like last night, but I'll do that soon. And then the hypercore DID method that I was referring to is there. So yeah, folks can take a look at that stuff. And yeah, if anybody have any questions or comments? You might say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I don't know if other people, are they allowed to unmute or no? Or do they have to type? If nobody has questions, we can wrap up early too. Next person can start if they're here. That's a good that's a good question, Gonzalo. So what I have right now, well, hang on, I can get it. So this is Idili right now. It's a Raspberry Pi and basically a battery controller. And right now I have it hooked up to a 1200 milliamp hour battery. And I've done a couple of tests on it, not when it was running like a full load, but it lasted a good 4 to 5 hours. And one of the nice things about it is that because it's only serving up traffic to you and potentially traffic that you're sharing with other people, is it's like most of the time it's idle. It's not actually doing any work a lot of the time. So the battery life is okay in that sense. I think obviously 5 hours is not going to be long enough to like make for a commercial product, obviously. But yeah, I think as I sort of get into the phase of like designing hardware and like laying out PCBs and stuff, I think I can probably do a better job than that, partially by freeing up some room for a larger battery, and also cutting out sort of extraneous things that are in there. I should also note, like right now, it's running Raspbian, which is great for developing for. It's sort of a nicer environment, but obviously it has a lot of other bloat kind of in it, even if you're running the headless version of Raspbian. And so I could see eventually chopping that down as far as it could go to probably running on something designed to be a lot more lightweight. That would probably get some better battery life out of it as well. Yeah, sure. So that's a good question as well. What's sort of like the user story here? I think it's kind of a funny user story right now because, you know, it's hard to imagine, out the bat, right out the door, sort of replacing the sort of mobile phone, right? We already have kind of iPhone and Android, and people aren't going to just drop sort of that because there's another interesting alternative. And so the user story for me right now is something that's carried alongside or in addition to a phone. And I mentioned earlier sort of envisioning it as an accessory or even as built into a piece of maybe a jewelry or something like that. So that and I sort of see it that way because it seems like that would be less of like, oh, I'm carrying around two phones, like why am I carrying around two devices or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I think the primary way to interact with it would be through a phone app. So I think from a user's perspective, it would actually probably appear to be much like another cloud service, right? And so if you're going into your Idili app because you want to share, you want to do sort of like what would the equivalent of like tweeting, right? So like you would just open it up and you go like new social message or something, and you would and you just type out your sort of microblog and you would hit go ahead, and maybe make some decisions in there about like what universe you want to share that with. Similarly for photos, right? You might take a photo with your phone, and the phone sort of just like Google Photos does, would sort of quietly upload that in the background to your Idili, and then you could come back to that later and start doing other things with the photo. You could then, okay, well, I'm going to tag that with the contents that are also the contacts that are also in my in my Idili store. Or you could decide you want to share it, and then you could sort of open that photo and share with mom because she's always bothering me that I don't send her enough photos of my son. So you could do it that way as well. But it would I hope sort of become sort of an app that is a hub for sort of all of the interactions that you want to do with your data. The only difference would be that you're not going to the cloud, right? You're going to a device that is there sort of with you. So that's, I think, the user story there is in some way, to be completely transparently the same as what your user story is today to a certain extent. But with, obviously, first of all, the controls, the privacy controls that sort of the decentralized kind of mode gives you, but with the same features that you could get from the cloud. And then I think down the road there's like all kinds of other things that you could do to sort of replace the phone as well, right? You could build it into something that has a screen. Or even, I think you could install, I think, Idili on like a Pine phone or the Librem phone, right? And say and then just have a UI built into the phone, as an app that would interact via on I guess localhost with the Idili that's running there. So you could do that as well. But yeah, like that eventually it would become a store of data that is yours and could interact with other people's Idilis, if this sort of becomes immensely sort of popular or whatever, both over the internet if they're not nearby, but also just over the local RF frequencies, if they're near enough to sort of interact with you, and so skipping the internet entirely. So yeah, I mean that's sort of rambling, but I don't know if that sort of answers your question, Gonzalo. Yeah, I'm aware of Solid. Yeah, and yeah, I think absolutely it would be good for them to interoperate. I do know about Solid. I've spoken with Tim Berners-Lee about it, and also a couple of the folks that were working on it, but when it was still at MIT. I think, and I've toyed with it myself as well, and yeah, I think interacting with it with Solid is absolutely interoperating with it would be important. I think where Solid and Idili kind of split off is that Solid still seems to have this model in its head of that data lives in the cloud, and I think one of the important things that Idili is striving to distinguish there is that data doesn't live in the cloud, for whatever the cloud means, right? It's just other people's computers, but that we have the technology and the engineering to have data live with its owner, instead of needing sort of rooms full of air conditioned racks of servers. Yeah. So yeah, it is similar in the sense of like a personal data pod, but trying to move that into a device that you can carry with you, basically. Yeah, no problem. Thanks for listening. Yeah, so there's two good questions there. So yeah, I think the vision would be, yes, that if there is another Idili nearby you that has the information that you are looking for, then yes, you could get that information from them without needing to go to the web. But that obviously the internet is always there, and so you can fall back on it if that's what you need to do. And then as far as actually shared content from the device, so that's also a good question. Obviously, so sometimes the device is going to die, right? If going to run out of power, or you're going to be somewhere where it's not available. And I think that there can be a couple solutions to this. Yes, you could do a cloud replica. You could also you could say to hey, my best friends or whatever have their Idilis, and I'm going to mirror for them. I'm going to back them up, basically, and be another source for their tweet equivalents if they go offline. And you could see sort of like doing that for 5 people you trust or something like that, right? Your best friends, to give you that sort of replication. That's especially important with the DID method, because obviously that's the sort of thing that you want. Your identity is the sort of thing that you do want to be able to have accessible, even if you go offline for some reason. And so yeah, getting sort of someone that you know to what's the word I'm looking for, to replicate basically your identity devices is
it's egg with a
Nina, your mic is on.
Sweet potato.
Me too. Sweet potato is the best. Sweet potato fries, oh, they're so good. So I think I'm almost out of time. I can actually remember when this was supposed to end now, because my time schedule is all messed up in my head. But yeah, if anyone has any last questions, I'm happy to take them, or yeah, I can turn it over to the next person.
Any last questions for Rob?
Looks like somebody is typing one.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Santiago was just saying we're not quite in a hurry just yet. All right, well, I'll stick around for a few minutes if other people have questions. But yeah, otherwise, I will wait for the next talk and listen to that. But thank you, everyone, for listening, and I hope some folks are interested enough to at least check out the repository, and particularly if folks have thoughts about the distributed identity method that they want to share, I would definitely be open to talking about that as well. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, that will be super cool, Ross. And thank you for sharing all the stuff. Yeah.